Well, good afternoon, everyone. We're going to go ahead and get started with our program today. First, let me just say welcome and thank you for being here. My name is Genevieve Kirk, and I am the Center for Nonprofit Excellence Director at the Community Foundation of East Central Illinois. And this event today, we are calling Go-To Tips for Getting Grants. We have assembled a fantastic panel of local experts in fund development. They'll be sharing their knowledge and their expertise with you today around grant writing. We hope that you leave the session today with some useful tips that will help you to identify suitable funding opportunities for your organizations, make some positive connections with local funders, write strong grant proposals that will help position your organization for funding, and understand emerging best practices around equity in the grant-seeking process. And we are here to learn with you. Here's our agenda for this afternoon. We're going to start by having our panelists introduce themselves to you. And then each of our panelists have prepared a short presentation of information that we hope you'll find helpful. Some of our panelists have an additional handout that accompanies the information that they're sharing, and you'll find those handouts on the table in front of you there. Then, following our four panelist presentations, we'll have a short time of questions and answers that you can address to any or all of our panelists. So if you have a pressing question that you'd like to ask in a group setting, we'll give you an opportunity to do that after all four panelists have had a chance to share their information. Then finally, we'll enter a breakout session where you can connect directly one-on-one with our panelists. It's also a fun time to network with each other, so we hope that you enjoy that opportunity. And we'll end our time together today at 2:30 p.m. I want to give a special thank you to the Champaign Public Library for hosting us today, for the refreshments and the fantastic room setup. We really appreciate your hospitality. And then also a big thank you to our four panelists for being here and their generosity in sharing their time and their expertise with all of us here today. A short housekeeping note that if you need to use the restroom during the presentation today, you can find those as you exit these doors, walk back towards the main entrance. They're on the right side. We also ask that you would silent or mute your cell phones during our presentation time together for the comfort of others around you. So without further ado, I would like to begin our program with panelist introductions. We have today Beverly Baker, who is the Chief Impact Officer at the United Way of Champaign County. Stephanie Davenport is the Grants and Marketing Coordinator at Developmental Services Center. Angie Hatfield-Marker is our President and CEO of the Community Foundation of East Central Illinois. And Madeline Wolski is the Business Librarian at Champaign Public Library. Would you please join me in welcoming our panelists today? And now I want to give them a chance to tell you about them and their experience, and specifically their connection to fund development. So we'll start with Bev and work down the line. If you can just share a brief introduction about yourself and how you got involved in this line of work.
Sure. Hi, everybody. Again, I'm Beverly Baker. I'm the Chief Impact Officer at United Way, and I actually started in the world of grant writing, grant seeking, and grant making on your side as a grant seeker, looking for grants to support work that I have done throughout my nonprofit career. And then moved into my role with United Way, where I help facilitate our grant making process in the community. And in my role, I still submit grants in collaboration with partners around the community. Some are corporate grants, some are state grants. So I'm still in the world of, I know what it takes to put it all together, submit it, worry about it, get funded, not get funded, and then all the reporting requirements that come along with it. So I've been on both sides. So Stephanie?
Yeah, so I am the grants and marketing coordinator at DSC, and I kind of like to think that my interest in fund development goes back to Girl Scout cookie selling days way back when, and helping with PTA fundraisers with my mom at Thomas Paine Elementary. But I've always just had an interest in generosity and giving and the impact it can have on your community. And today, at DSC, I'm involved in working with our local foundations and just corporate grants and seeking those out, looking for new grants and different reporting and just all that goes into that and the publicity involved with that. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. I started in the for-profit sector, so very different from the work that I am doing now, but during that time served on the board for a local nonprofit for about 6 years and helped with their capital campaign and applied for a lot of grants as a volunteer board member and helped with that process. And then they posted a position for a chief fundraiser, and I applied and sort of crossed that bridge from the for-profit sector to the nonprofit sector. So I worked at a health and human service organization for a number of years and in resource development, so applying for grants and then helping with the reporting requirements after the fact before joining the staff at the Community Foundation. So my role now is to fundraise so that we can make grants to local organizations. We have a couple of different committees that we oversee for our grant making process, so sort of both sides of that for me as well. So.
My name is Madeline. So I first started researching grants and trying to find them for the university back when I was a graduate student there, specializing in just basically sustainable research, how to fund lots of the scientists that do some amazing work. And then when I came out of that program, I wanted to throw community parties in downtown Urbana and just fun things, and so I applied for lots of grants for that, had some good success with our cities, and then now as the business librarian, one of the biggest parts of my jobs is to help people find the right information, and we have amazing resources at the library to find grants for you, and so that's what I do.
Wonderful. Thanks to all of you. We're going to go ahead and get into our presentation of information, and Madeline is first up talking about starting the grant application process.
Thank you so much, Genevieve. So just a quick question. How many of you have just kind of opened up Google and typed in grants? Everyone. And the initial reaction you get when you do that is maybe overwhelm, frustration, because there's so much information out there. And I'm speaking from myself because I used to be there, definitely in your shoes. I don't like it. I like it when I have a clear kind of path where I know where I'm going to go. And Google, unfortunately, just won't cut it. So this is where your handy public library and librarians can come in and help. So when you're starting the grant application process, one of the biggest things I always encourage people to do is determine your research goals. Essentially, this is where you ask yourself, maybe look at your nonprofit mission statement, just see, okay, what is it we are trying to do? Who exactly are we serving? What exactly are we doing for them? And so once you determine your goals, or like, why am I searching for funding? You can then start defining some key questions and search terms. So a good example would be, I have a nonprofit that provides after-school engagement for low economic individuals in our community. So that's kind of like maybe my key term, and then you essentially branch out from that. And once you know what exactly you're searching for, you can then start your research in a way that's so wonderful because it saves you so much time. And I definitely hear a lot from people like, Madeline, this isn't fun. I don't really enjoy mapping out my research. I'd rather just deep dive in. But the cool thing is that saves you so much time. And I think a lot of us know, if you're in the nonprofit world or trying to raise funds, time and maybe bodies is not something we have a ton of. So that's why I always encourage starting your research with a plan. So on your worksheets, I actually have kind of an area where you can definitely go along with me. And so I encourage you to kind of brainstorm, create a word map. This is where you're asking, this is your topic. So start with that. Kind of maybe draw a circle around it. I love to doodle. And just say, what exactly am I doing? And then start finding synonyms, finding broader terms, related terms, and narrowing that down of just keywords. So earlier I had said like after school program. Maybe one of my big focuses is health advocacy. So I'm gonna pull in that keyword. Or maybe it's I have programming within my after school care that teaches kids basically necessary skills in order to pursue a different occupation. So really kind of explore and identify those key terms. Exactly what am I doing? How am I serving them? So finding some grants, once you have kind of that word map out and available, there's a lot of different places. A lot of people initially, again, just go to Google. We're not doing that today. You could also maybe look at like grants.gov, GuideStar. You could look at RFPs, View 990s. But I think that's pretty tedious because unfortunately, when you're kind of going to these resources, they're not set up in a way that's really intuitive. Like you can't just find in like a bunch of 990s, like, okay, so who's actually funding after school programming? Or who's funding this health disparity thing that I want to do? So a great workaround is, you've guessed it, your local library. We have this amazing resource called the Foundation Directory Online, and it's unsurpassed in scope, depth, and currency as far as like where you want to go to find grants. So they have over 250,000 funders, over 2 million recipients, so those who have gotten the grants. And they also they have about 4 million grants within their database. And it's nice, it's not exactly all current grants that are open, but it's historic grants that you can do lots of research and figure out how does my association or organization align with this person who's giving money, with this similar organization who has gotten money from someone else. It's really wonderful. So I'm going to take the rest of my program to just kind of show you guys. And so in the bottom of your worksheet, there's kind of these questions to ask yourself. The one thing about Foundation Directory Online, you can only access this within the Champaign Public Library. You can bring in your own device, you can access it on our Wi-Fi, or we have a lot of computers upstairs that you can use. So I'm going to click on this in library use right here. And they make it really easy. So at the bottom of your worksheet, there's kind of where we identify our needs. Again, this plays off that word map you created. You ask yourself, who are you serving? Is it seniors? Is it adolescents? Is it a minority population? Where are they? So geographically, maybe include the county. Is it Illinois that you serve? Is it international? What are you doing for them? So are you providing educational programming? Are you giving them funds so they can attend this other thing? So once we've identified our needs, I'm just going to pop it in this easy search bar. So I'm still going to do after school, let's do education, and I'm just going to pop in Illinois and press enter. And it automatically pulls out a bunch of these search terms. So these are those keywords that you may find in your word map, and it matches you up. This is too many. 85,000 grant makers, 3 million grants, recipients, and tax forms. So this is where, and librarian, I love going into those advanced search options. It's just so much fun to filter. That's right at the top. I like how I always point at my computer screen when no one's behind me. And this is where you can really narrow down your search terms. So you know what? I'm actually not doing any out-of-school learning. Like, yeah, I guess you could say it's family services, youth development. If you don't see what you need in there, you can also find from their headings here, like for example, arts and culture. I can select that and narrow it down even more. Because, you know, my goal is I don't want to have to weed through 85,000 grant makers. Like initially that's like, yes, all the money I can get. When in actuality, again, we want to save you the time. We want to make sure that you're essentially increasing your chances of getting that money. So one thing we can do is narrow down that geographic focus. It didn't put in Illinois. Instead, I'm going to do Champaign County. Now let's do population served. Again, it has lots of recommendations. I'm just going to do age groups, children and youth. You can also narrow this down even further by saying, you know what, I want to make sure that these youth, they're at risk. And that essentially is what I want. I'm only going to focus on these top 3 because those are kind of the top ones where this is identifying your needs. And we can see, look at that, 159 grant makers that then I can start to research and see if, do they align with me? So the next part in that handout is the evaluation of prospects. So again, I want to make sure that I'm not wasting money applying for a grant that I'm probably not going to get. So let's go ahead and I'm going to click on the Community Foundation of East Central Illinois. This is essentially a profile. At the top you can see when it was last updated, which was in May. It's wonderful. And this E right here means that they submit some of their information directly to Foundation Directory Online, rather than Foundation Directory just finds it from another place. And here you have all the information you need. So at the top it has kind of contact information. This is where you can essentially identify those needs that you have, and essentially just establish that, okay, human services, that's a huge part of what CFECI funds. They also do a part of education. So you know what, because I'm really doing some after school stuff, this looks good for me. I can also see where the money is going. So within Illinois, that's where I'm at, perfect. And then how big are the grants? Maybe I'm only needing I want 5 to 10 grand. Perfect. So scrolling down, I had mentioned grants earlier. This is the profile of a grant maker, but you can also research recipients. So these are nonprofits, other organizations that CFECI has given money to in the past. And I'm able then to see, okay, they gave about 12 grand to Don Moyer's Boys and Girl Club, which coincidentally enough also provides after school programming. In my mind, I'm thinking okay, our organizations are pretty similar. I can click on that to get more grant details, go into the recipient, and then see who else funded that nonprofit, that organization. And you know what? I'm going to think then, okay, so if my organization is so similar to this, I'm going to try to look into maybe United Way of Champaign County, Illinois, and see if they're currently accepting any grant applications. So do you kind of see how that works? You can kind of essentially see what's similar to you, do some research, and find more grants available and grant makers. So I'm still in that. Let's go back to here. All right, so we kind of saw what was going on. How am I on time? Good, great. Scroll down, we've got funding interests. Again, this is what you want to match up with your key terms that you're trying to find, your identifying interests. We can scroll down to about. And it's wonderful, again, just to get more information about the grant maker. And then if we scroll down more, we can see if they're currently accepting grants and what requirements they have. So again, if I don't really have any volunteers, or if you know what, I actually am not verified by the IRS, I'm already going to be they might not give me money because I don't have a copy of my IRS determination letter. So I'm going to move on to the next one. So again, this is just information to help validate your time spent applying to a specific grant. And at the bottom, they have these giving limitations. So if I'm in Chicago, I'm probably not going to get any money from them. And my favorite part of this, and I think we're going to touch on it a little bit later, but you get to check and see, this is actually linked up with LinkedIn. You can see if you know anyone who's currently within this organization and maybe start a conversation. So, and then also has communications, oh my gosh, recent news, go-to tips for getting grants. How nice is that? And it also has online communications. So again, we want to make sure that we're just validating our time. That's all that it is. And then, so that's just kind of a really brief overview of FDO. Earlier I talked about you can only access this within the library. The cool thing is, if you don't have enough time to spend to kind of do all of this at the library, we're just going to download that PDF, or you can just email it straight to yourself. So all of this information is something that you can either bring a little USB drive or just email it to yourself. you can open it up and you have all of that information to take with you to maybe from the comfort of your own home, just kind of get to it. Last on here, I want to show, there's this help button up here where you can see kind of an FDO guide, Foundation Directory Online, and it gives you more information on how best to use this resource. But I'd also encourage you, we do a lot of one-on-ones at the library. If you would like one-on-one help with me and we can walk through FDO together, that's a thing that we do. And you don't have to have a library card in order to do it. Again, all of our services, programming, if you're in the building, you have access to it. One other thing I want to mention, going back to the PowerPoint, which is over here. Okay. I listed a lot of other resources for grants, and I didn't list grant.gov. Honestly, it's not my favorite resource to use. I don't think it's really accessible for a lot of people. But in this first kind of portion, I've listed lots of local areas for you to grab grants. And I don't know if there's any small businesses here, but like the Small Business Development Center, they also provide grant information. The University of Illinois Extension webinars, it's really great just to kind of check in there every so often because they sometimes have like a how to apply for this state grant that's coming up. I also have Community Foundations of East Central Illinois, whose new grant application recently opened up for the year, which is very exciting. And then as far as statewide programming and also just city programming, Illinois Department of Commerce, this is really great to find Illinois-based grants. Right now they have a pretty popular community development grant that a lot of people utilize. USDA community facilities programs. This is helpful if maybe you live outside of Champaign in one of the smaller cities, want to look into some rural assistance. And then lastly, looking at the city of Urbana or the city of Champaign for their grant programs. And again, I just kind of want to close out by just, let's connect. If you want kind of a one-on-one assistance finding grants, I don't want to say librarians have superpowers, but kind of. Just reach out. We're always here to help. Great. And I will pass off the microphone to Angie.
Thank you. Yeah, let's clap for that. Absolutely. So for those of you who don't know, our community foundation operates an incubator for new and emerging nonprofits, and we had a presentation from the library. They shared this platform for those members of our incubator, and it was life-changing for them as individuals and for their organizations to have access to these lists of granting organizations, and then to be able to take those names and search, and maybe that's the time to Google them, right? Yeah. When you've identified the actual organization and read more about their granting cycles and their staffs and their board and volunteers and just ways to make connections. So that's really what I'm going to talk about today, the importance of building relationships with your funders, especially local grant funding organizations. You can go ahead and advance my slide there. So why should we do this, right? Charitable giving in the United States reached a record high in 2020 with over $471 billion donated to the nonprofit organizations or granted out to nonprofit organizations. Foundations played a significant role in this trend as they saw an increase in giving by 17%, making up an estimated $88.5 billion in those contributions. So the pandemic, we saw an increase in donations and an increase in grant making. And I don't see that changing in the future. I think if these organizations do a great job with their fundraising and their donor retention, those donations amounts will continue to grow, and in turn, those grants distributed will continue to grow. We have to give it away. It's our mission as grant funders to make grants to local nonprofits. So that is, in a nutshell, why you should connect with these organizations. So a wise old boss of mine once said, if you ask for money, you'll typically get advice. If you ask for advice, a lot of times you'll get money. So this is an approach I've taken when I'm applying for grants. I send so after I locate the organization, the granting organization. I'm going to take a look-see at their website, and I'm going to see who on their staff or on their board I might know, or someone at my organization might know, and I'm going to send an email to that individual just asking if they could please tell me more about their granting cycles. It's as simple as that, and then you'll get a response that will explain exactly what the organization is able to distribute in grants over the course of the year. So most granting organizations have different requests for proposals, and those timelines are all different. And so it's important that you have an idea of what those look like for your own organization. But that's kind of your in. If you can get an email to someone who is a program officer or a staff person at the organization who kind of oversees the grant making, typically they'll be happy to respond. And then at that point, we're going to ask for some advice, right? Go ahead and take me there. So people are going to give to people. There are real people on the other side of these granting organizations that Madeline listed on her really cool little document that you're handing out here. And all of these granting relationships are relationships. They're relationship-based, and two-way communication is so important for you as the nonprofit, but also for us as the grantors. So we want to build relationships that are personable and purposeful, so that we can understand giving priorities of the grant-making organization. We want to ensure that your project at your organization is a good fit with the granting body. And we want to ask questions to better frame and inform our grant proposals. So connecting with funders on a personal level is going to allow you to advocate for your organization and your cause person to person. In doing so, you're going to be able to show, because I know all of you are passionate about your organizations and your project, you're going to be able to show that to the granting organization. And you're also going to get a better grasp over their decision-making process, and it's going to give you a leg up when you're applying for funds. Go ahead. So we're going to get back to basics with our relationship with our grant funders. So we want to just cultivate some meaningful relationships. We want to look for shared values. A lot of times when you're Googling the organization online, you're going to find their mission and their vision and their value statement, and you're going to see if it aligns with the mission and vision and value statement of your organization. We're going to look to match our interests with the funders and their resources. It's really a two-way street. So when we meet with these granting organization, with representatives from the granting organization, we want to talk a little bit about our organization and in a way that shows our passion, but we also want them to tell us about their organization, about grants they've made, about their granting cycle, timeline, guidelines, requirements. So we want to be good listeners when we're meeting with these folks. And then we always want to follow up after those meetings, certainly with just an email or a nice note so that it keeps you front of mind with the grant funders, but also after submitting your grant to see if they need any follow-up information. And then always follow through on your promises. I think, Bev, you might talk a little bit about this in your part, but so I'll leave that to you. And then how to build stronger grant funder relationships. So there's really 5 steps, simple steps to follow. So we've talked a little bit about researching your potential funder and making that initial call. It really can be as easy as an email to someone on staff or a board member you know, just requesting more information. And then as a follow-up, you'd really like to sit down with them and share more about your organization and your special program or project and hear more about their priorities. It's as simple as that. We always want to be mindful of time and ask meaningful questions. So before you go, you want to have done your research and prepared just some bullet points to make sure the conversation goes as smoothly as possible. We want to know about their giving priorities, the history of their gifts. So you can find a lot of that on this website, but you want them to share that with you as well. What's the average size of their grants? Who and where do they typically fund? And what have their giving trends been in the last 3 years, specifically throughout the pandemic? It's really interesting to see how that's changed for a lot of our granting organizations. Another way you can do a little bit of research is you can pull up all of our 990s online and see exactly who we're granting to and how much on an annual basis. So that's a really easy way to gain some insight into our organizations. I mentioned looking at boards of directors for granting organizations or committee members for grant committees, just to see who on your staff or board or volunteers might know someone there. That's an easier connection when you do have someone that can make that introduction. Step 2, we talked a little bit about this, but practicing active listening. So how many of you have concise elevator speeches for your organization? I won't put you on the spot if you raise your hand, I promise. But okay, great. So that's something that each of you, if you're applying for grants for your organization, should be able to tell me if we get on an elevator on the first floor, by the time we reach maybe the 5th or 6th floor, what I need to know about your organization and the program that you're asking funding for. So it should be concise and passionate, that you can fit a little bit about your mission and history and what you would hope to accomplish with those grant funds. We also want to give the grant funder appropriate time to discuss their priorities and projects and processes as well. Being responsive, we all wear a lot of hats in the nonprofit sector. Genevieve and I, we're the IT person and the building manager, and we fix the geothermal heating unit when it breaks, and, rake the leaves and shovel the snow. You guys we're all doing a million things as directors of organizations, but it's really important that you have someone either on your staff or on your board or a volunteer who can be responsive when grant funders have questions or need more information or want to meet. It's important that it's really vital that you do. And that can be a good role for a board member. That is the role I played when I was serving on a board, and I was happy to do it to take the load off of the staff who is sorely overworked and underpaid, as we all are in this sector. So whether it's during this pre-application period, during our decision-making process, or once the grant's been given, we just want to make sure that we have someone who we know can respond promptly to a funder. We as funders are much more likely to give to an organization and renew a grant if we can get a hold of someone there when we need to. Step number 4 is demonstrate your passion and expertise. So this goes back to that elevator speech. You want to be the authority on this project. You want to know everything there is to know about what you're requesting funding for. You want to be passionate about the work. And again, prepare those talking points ahead of time so that you can confidently speak about how you're going to use these funds that a grant funder would be giving you. We want to be honest also about any challenges or barriers that could potentially hinder your success. As a grant funder, we appreciate hearing what challenges you expect could creep up, and a lot of times that's one thing that we'll be able to give you advice to help you kind of work through those potential challenges before they become a barrier. When we go back to talking about elevator speeches, we just want to make sure that we are then engaging with open-ended questions that go beyond a simple yes or no. So you want to talk, but you also want to get the grant funder talking about their guidelines and their requirements so that you can use those to submit your grant. And then again, following up and closing the loop, we want your communication with us to go beyond asking for money. So I like to be in regular contact with the nonprofit partners that we work with. A lot of them attend our executive director support network meetings. A lot of them are involved with our incubator. A lot of them are emailing, Stephanie, you're really great about this, pictures and stories of impact after the funding. So anything you can do to just keep those touches happening with your grant funders, it's much more likely that you'll get future funding or renewals of grants if we know you as a nonprofit and we know your staff and we know your projects and we know your successes. Questions? Oh, we're gonna wait and do questions later, right? Okay. That's all. And then I think so you guys each have a takeaway tool. I found this online and honestly, I couldn't write it any better myself, but it is questions to ask prospective funders. So you're not going to ask all of these, but when we talk about going into that meeting and having your research and having some bullet points, this is it. You can take this with you and it's going to help determine if you're a match with the funder. It's going to give you insight for a successful application. It's going to help you understand their process. It's going to give you questions to ask once you receive funding. So that's a really important piece of this communication and two-way street as well. And then it's going to help you if you're rejected, because it's going to happen. It's the worst part about what we do is having to send rejection letters, but we want to share with you why we weren't able to fund you and how we might be able to work with you in the future. So those are really important questions to ask so that you can make improvements and hopefully receive funding going forward. Oftentimes we'll award reduced funding, and so there's a little section on here with questions that you can ask of the grant funders on why you weren't fully funded for your request, and then questions to ask before next year and to those foundations who don't have active opportunities. So I hope that you find this useful. Hopefully you reach out to me and ask some of these questions. I'd love to answer them for any of your organizations. But this is a really great website and blog. Genevieve, we're sending these slides out afterward? Okay, I see you guys feverishly taking notes, but we should have clarified that up front. You should check it out. It was really helpful when I thought about how I'd prepare for this presentation, and I think you'll find it helpful as nonprofit leaders when you think about connecting with grant funders. That's all I have.
Great. Thank you, Angie. Okay, so we've done our research. We know the insider's tips on connecting with funders. Now it's actually writing the proposal. So Stephanie, take it away.
Yeah, thank you. Such great information already. So now we're going to do the ABCs of writing a strong grant proposal in 10 minutes. So we're going to really drill it down to the basics here. And I think that's so great whether you're a seasoned grant writer or you're a beginner. You know, we go to the basics. It really brings us back to the fundamentals, which is so important, you know, like I said, whether you're a beginner or a veteran writer. And so for tip A, I think this is so great. I learned it from a veteran grant writer when I first started out. She was a writer for the state of Illinois, and she taught us that, you know, when you're the grant writer, you're really the expert at the grant application and request itself, like the material that's going into it, as opposed to being the expert at the topic or material. Now what you're going to do then, I mean, I think that takes off so much pressure, but then you're going to be presenting your organization as the expert on the grant application. So it doesn't mean, you know, your organization is not the expert, but your job as a grant writer is really to be the expert in compiling everything. And so on your handout, if you're following along, the way that you're going to do that is these 3 C's. So the 3 C's that make a strong grant proposal are one that is complete and one that makes a compelling case. And how we're going to do that then is by following our grant funders' guidelines. And I believe that when you do follow their guidelines, that's going to really help you go a long way in making that compelling case. Because regardless of who the grant funder is, they've pretty much laid out the instructions of how you're going to make them happy by giving you these wonderful guidelines. And we're going to, I've again brought the Community Foundation of East Central Illinois guidelines along with me. And, you know, this applies whether it's a big state grant, I think, or, you know, a smaller grant, you know, that's because there's all different sizes of grants, but these principles pretty much, they're the same. They just kind of come in different sizes. So this will give you a strong foundation, no pun intended, but so sorry, I love puns. The way that you can kind of get started here, I still like to print stuff out, and I know it can be a lot of paper when you're working with grants, but it really just kind of helps you to wrap your, just kind of keep my eye on my time here, wrap your brain around all the moving parts of a grant. Is just to start off with the guidelines before you do any writing, because you're going to find out, as many of you, the grant writers, if you're grant writers here in the room, you know there's a lot of moving parts, and you're probably not going to be able to write it on your own. If you're in a smaller organization, you might wear many hats, as Angie said, so you might have to be the writer and, you know, the finance person when it comes to the grant application. But so you're going to start, you know, I just kind of go through and highlight or write, and I'm not going to step through the entire guidelines here, but just to get an idea, I'll start out and always start with eligibility, because there's no point in reading the whole thing if you're not going to be eligible. So, you just look and say, 501c3, as Madeline mentioned earlier, if you don't have your IRS determination letter, we're not going to be eligible for this one probably. So am I in East Central Illinois? Yes. So, okay, yay, we're going good so far. And there's different things with funding, which I'll come back to. Something that's really important is this section here I've got circled where it says not, what the things that they're not going to fund. That will give you a lot of clues that you want to take a look at with the guidelines. So there's just a lot of important information here. And a lot of grant guidelines and applications are in an e-portal these days, which is just an online application basically. And before you just start typing away in there, a lot of times it's helpful to copy and paste that into a Word document, and it just kind of gives you a way you can share it with your team. It'll give you a way to kind of work through all that, and I print that out to you just because not that I like to waste paper, but it just gives you a working document, like I said. So, but it will tell you things like, so we're not the experts on everything in there, but it tells us what expertise we're going to need, what experts on our team we're going to need. So right away I see we're going to need a financial summary. If it's for our family development program, I might need some expertise from our children's program. So it tells you what stories, maybe I'm going to need some stories for impact, all the moving parts that we're going to need. So that's kind of what you want to look at there. And in regards to funding, and Angie touched on this a little bit too, this is just something called like the Goldilocks principle: not too little, not too big. You want to kind of land within their funding range, but that's an easy way to remember it. And it's kind of counterintuitive sometimes, I think, but if they're asking for a funding range of $20,000 to $50,000, you don't want to ask for an item or funding for a program that's $1,000, for example. You want to find that kind of sweet spot in the middle. The Goldilocks principle is a nice way to think about that. So again, that expertise is what you're looking for in building that, and you want to get those deadlines and notify the people on your team that you're going to need things from, because a month can go by fast when you're writing a grant. Everyone is busy in a nonprofit, especially if it's a small team. It doesn't really matter the size of your team, so it goes by quickly. So on slide 3, another part of making a compelling, strong proposal is our stories. So they put the heart into your grant request and appeal to our emotions. And a great thing to do is to create a story bank. And a story bank is just a filing system. You can do it any way you want. I like to keep mine on a computer. We have spreadsheets that kind of track all of these, but if you get in the habit of doing it, you'll always have stories to use for grants and keeping them fresh. And it will just jog like your thinking for when grants come about, because sometimes you do have a tight turnaround. And for example, there have been times when we've had a grant request come about, and I've been able to call a director and say, hey, we've got this opportunity to apply for something for transportation. A while back you told me about this story. We've got seniors with disabilities who are really utilizing our transportation program. Is this still the case? What's new? Can I, put these, heartfelt bullet points into this grant and have this be accurate? So that's just an example, but if I wouldn't have had those stories, from before that I could kind of retrieve from that story bank, we wouldn't have been able to do that and turn it around as we needed to. So there's that type of thing. A quote that I read from AFP recently, it said, people don't give when they understand, they give when they feel. And so of course you're going to need data points sometimes for a grant, but those stories it's what makes people feel the heart behind your grant. And this little guy up here, this picture was taken actually right here in this room, or one of the rooms in this area, I believe, but we have a whole series of those photos that we were able to grab, and we can use those at different times. And where you see the photos come in, we keep them in a bank similar, and sometimes on corporate grants, they will give you a spot, attach extra documents, and they will ask for almost a proposal outside of the proposal, if that makes sense. They'll say, basically rewrite what you just wrote on the online portal, or they'll ask for like a publicity proposal, and that's where you can kind of use those photos, and it's really great to have those. You don't know when you're going to need them. And after you finish your publicity phase in the grant, you want to add those stories that you shared after or during the publicity phase of your grant. You can put those in your story bank. So, and a great way, or how we did our, one way that we do our stories at DSC. So we have at least 150 employees, and there's no way, there's 2 of us in our development department. So I forgot who shared about that. There's no way we could, our leadership team or our small development department, that we could keep a pulse on all the stories and all of the grant needs in our agencies. So we created, I have a online Google form that we send out, and it drops right into a spreadsheet on our Google Drive, and it just prompts people when we send it out. Not only do we get items that people would like to see us ask for, but they'll send, oh yeah, we have this coming up if you guys want to do a story, or if you want to come out and take a photo. And so it's really great. I think we hear about things that we wouldn't otherwise learn about. And then lastly, review everything. And it's as simple as ABC, right? And it seems like common sense, but it's so easy. It's to overlook an error. And I'll share a personal story. I'm sure there's other grant writers in the room who have made an error or overlooked something before. And I know our Central Illinois funders are they're always very courteous, and will give you a call or email you if you forget something. But I think Madeline mentioned that it's very competitive with grants. But outside of this area, sometimes it's not that people aren't kind, but it's just they don't know you. It's even more competitive, and you might not always get that phone call. You will just get declined. And so always overlook everything. And if you sent a letter of intent, look back and see what you promised to do in your letter of intent, and make sure your grant aligns with that. Overlook all of your financial documents. At DSC, we kind of have I don't know if it's a spoken policy, it's just kind of our process where 3 or 4 of us overlook everything and the edits and stuff before it gets sent off, in most cases, unless it's, very minimal. But there has been one point where we probably about 3 years ago, we were doing a new grant with a new funder, and it is kind of a unspoken thing. A lot of times you don't get a grant the first time you apply for it. I've just heard that from different grant writers. But we were doing a new grant to a place up in Chicago, and I had called. We had done a letter of intent, and we were invited to apply. I talked to her on the phone, and you're not always going to get it, but felt pretty good about it. And then we ended up getting declined, and when I called to follow up afterwards and get feedback on it, she said that one of the tabs on the bottom of a spreadsheet had the wrong year on it. I was like, the tab on the spreadsheet? And my heart just sunk, because it was very frustrating. I didn't argue with her, but I was like, it was the tab on the spreadsheet. And she's like, well, we have no way of knowing that that's not that year's data. And that was really a discouraging thing, but also a learning moment, because it goes back to tip A, that even though I'm not the expert on that data that was in that spreadsheet, I was, that's my job to overlook everything. And I tell you, never again will I not look at all those tabs on the spreadsheet. So review everything.
Super. Thank you so much, Stephanie, for those ABCs.
Yes.
And last for our presentations, Bev's going to talk with us about equity in the grant seeking process.
Thank you. And before I do that, I'm going to add on one more, maybe it's a D for what Stephanie was sharing, is not only should you review your documentation and your grant before you hit that submit button, but have somebody completely separate and apart from your work review it as well. That is one of the, I just think that is a great way to make sure that you're communicating to a complete stranger who doesn't know about your work in a way that's clear and concise and comprehensive. So have a friend, another colleague, somebody that's just really separate from them. They'll catch the acronyms that you use. They'll ask questions about how your sentences flow, and you've said the same thing 4 times. You might want to go back and just say it once. Those kinds of things that you get in the rhythm of what you're doing and your passion comes through. So having somebody with an unbiased and lovingly critical, constructively critical framework weigh in. And I really recommend that. And they can find a lot of the errors and the little things that can be cleaned up and make a much stronger proposal going forward. So that's just a little side note added there for D that I wanted to share with all of you. So now I'm going to talk about what I was really invited here to talk about today. Genevieve asked me to talk a little bit about emerging best practices around equity in grant seeking. And really, as I thought about this, I'm like, really, it's more about the changes that are happening on the grant making side that I want to make sure that I talk with you all about so that you can be better prepared in your grant seeking and your grant writing. So we know that this has been, it's been an interesting couple of years, right? We've had a lot of big things happen around our world and within our nation. And inequities have really come to the surface, and it is a buzz right now. Diversity, equity, and inclusion, those concepts are getting the attention that has been long overdue and that they deserve. And we see that coming from grant makers and foundations as well. They're recognizing that it's a priority, and they're making adjustments within their grant making focus and processes as well. One thing that I just want to point out, I'm not an expert on any of this, right? We're all on our own journey, so I just, I want to make that clear. And our grant funders are often along, at the beginning of their journey as well. And things will continue to change as we begin to absorb this and make this more a part of all of our this is the way we do business all the time, and not just a separate thing that we're doing right now. So things will continue to change, and we recognize that from a grant making standpoint as well as a human service organization. But diversity, equity, inclusion often get lumped together and referenced in one way. They really are each piece of that, each component is separate and unique and has its own strength and its own meaning. So we need to keep that in mind as we're talking about it. And as you're reading through grant applications and looking at the priorities that are before you, just making sure that you have a concept about all 3 of those concepts. And what we're realizing is that what's coming to light for grant funders and many human service organizations is that we've been operating under a savior model. Grant makers often say, we've got the money, we know what needs to be done, there's research that says this works, so we're telling you this is the work that you need to do. And I come from a place of honesty. United Way has operated like that. Many of our local funders have. We have the money, we've done research, we know what needs to be done. But that's beginning to change now, and we're recognizing that, yes, we can come with knowledge and care and concern and a passion for our community, but we need to be sure that we're hearing from the community and that we're bringing voices into the work and having that inform the grant making, the priority setting, just like those of you that are working in human service organizations need to bring those voices into the day-to-day work that you do as well. So it's really shifting that from a we know everything model to we need to hear from you, and we want to incorporate that into our decision making. So it's much more of a collaborative approach. And as grant makers are beginning to make these changes within their own organizations, they're going to be expecting the same things from the organizations that they eventually award grants to. And so I go ahead and switch to the next one, Genevieve, and talk a little bit about changes that are happening in the grant making side as foundations and funders are beginning to recognize diversity, equity, and inclusion as a priority. And knowing some of these can help you be better prepared. One is, these organizations are, I know my time's not up yet.
You're good.
Okay, somebody's ringing. Embedding equitable practices into the diversity of their staff, their board, and their policies, right? They're doing that as grant funding organizations, so they're going to expect to see that from all of you as grant-making organizations as well. Make sure that you are, as they outreach to impacted individuals and bring them into the grant-making process, they're going to want to see you as grant seekers doing the same, that you're reaching out to the populations that you're trying to reach and serve through your work and bring them into your process as well. Grant makers are also doing more around simplifying their application process to remove barriers, which is wonderful because sometimes as grant funders, our online systems, they can be very cumbersome. More and more are providing information sessions and technical assistance opportunities, so make sure that you are poised to take advantage of those opportunities because they really can be helpful to help you understand the parameters that they have set around their application. So again, you can meet all of those expectations and criteria that they have laid out within that grant. Oftentimes, the grant funders are beginning to ask for less cumbersome information, but then what they want is more impactful data. So they're making a switch. They might be making the grant a little bit easier to access and to apply, but then the information that they want from you needs to be that much more deeper and specific. And so that's going to take some evolution on the side of grant seekers and human service organizations to make sure that you're capturing that information in a way that you can share the impact of your work, both in story and in data and results. You can go ahead and switch to the next one. And I think it's me that's ringing. So, that's an alarm going off for some reason.
It's very soothing.
Is it? It's like being in church and you're like, why doesn't somebody turn that thing off? And of course, can't find my phone. There it is. Okay. We're gonna just stop that. Okay, sorry about that, folks. And you even reminded us to turn those things off. But anyway, so equity in grant seeking and grant writing. Make sure that within your organization, you're becoming a student of diversity, equity, and inclusion, really understanding your own biases and working with your team on their unconscious biases, and understand that it's a journey. There's not a start and a stop. It's a constant journey. Spend time in reflection and preparation on that. Work with your board, your administrative team. Make sure that you are positioned to help, to embrace the change, but then also to help others within your organization do the same. And there are so many resources here locally, but also online. Again, a great Google search can turn up a lot of online resources that are free that can help you begin that process within your organization or within yourself first if you need to begin that journey yourself. But it's important that your whole organization begins that process. Also taking a look at how your organization looks and functions. Do you have an equity statement? Is diversity, equity, and inclusion a separate statement that it's just perfunctory? Here we've said we have this statement, so check, we met that requirement. Or are you as an organization embedding it throughout your organization and the work that you do? And that's really what grant funders are going to be looking at as well. It's great to check a box and say, okay, we took some time and we did this, but where the rubber meets the road is really when you start to embed it through all of the work that you're doing. It's not separate, it's a part of every aspect of your work, from your staff, your administration, your board, your policies and procedures, and to the way you work and interact and serve your clients. Also looking at your hiring, your advisory groups, all of that is very much a part of the way your organization looks, feels, and functions. And then going to number 4, engage the voices you aim to reach. Like I said, it's so important to not just assume you know what the community needs or the target population that you're trying to reach needs. Actually spend some time engaging with them and hearing from them about what they think and feel, what they want to see, what's going to be helpful. That's really important to bring those voices to the table. And again, that's where advisory boards can be helpful, making sure that you have maybe a key group of people, even if it's not an official advisory board, that you can go to and say, help me think this through, or can I pick your brain on this? I need some insight and a different perspective. It's important to have those voices represented in the work that you do. And again, both in your work as an organization, but the work that you are proposing in your grant that you will be doing then and providing in the community. Looking at opportunities to go to those that you're trying to reach instead of having them always come to you. So look for those opportunities to go deeper into the community. And reach the target population, the clients that you're trying to reach and serve, instead of asking them always to come to you. And then find ways to engage regularly. Again, having an advisory board, having events in the community, surveys, and just a key group of people that you can go to that can be your sounding board as well. And then really take a look at the data. And this is important too, and it goes along to submitting a solid grant application, is what's the data telling you? What story is it telling you? Is it doing the work and having the results that it's intended to do? Your data will tell you that. And if you're not reaching your target population, on that sheet that Madeline referenced right at the beginning, that red box at the bottom, you can add in there, besides who are you serving, where are they, what are you doing for them, how do you know? I mean, that's a big question. How do you know that you're reaching the right people, and how do you know that it's doing what you intended for it to do? So feel free to add those little bullet points there too. That's the data that's going to be impactful in your storytelling, because right there you've got results, you've got stories that you can tell, and you're able to prove that we're reaching who we said we needed to reach, and the work is having the effect and the impact that it was intended to have. And there's research out there that supports it as well. So you have your local day-to-day work, but then there's bigger picture research that helps deepen the story behind the work that you're doing as well. And I think that's really it in a nutshell. Again, just making sure that you're looking at diversity, equity, and inclusion all across the organization, not just from your staff and your board, but all the way through your policies and procedures, and hearing directly from the clients and the target population that you are reaching to serve. Because again, just stressing, if grant funders are doing this through their work, they want to see you as grant recipients engaged and making those steps just like they are. So I think that's it. And again, I apologize about the alarm going off on my phone.
Great, thank you, Bev. Let's join me in thanking Bev and all of our panelists. And now I'd like to open it up to a time of questions and answers. Again, this is together as a group, so if you have something specific that you want to ask one-on-one, we'll do that a little bit later. But any general questions for the good of the group, you're welcome to raise your hand, and I'll bring a microphone to you.
Okay, my first question, can we use foundations as investors when we're starting a nonprofit to secure a way for funding?
You can. A lot of them may not. I mean, I'm going to suggest, and I think most of the people at this table would say, start with your local funders and local funding opportunities first to really cut your teeth and start your organization with a local focus. Then you will build some proof of success, and that is going to resonate more strongly with larger, perhaps out of the area grant funders. So I know at United Way, we're not opposed to helping new organizations get started, but typically there needs to be a little bit of traction or something that you're able to bring forward to show that there's some success of your organization and the work that you do.
This is for Stephanie. You mentioned the LOI, the letter of intent. What's inside of a letter of intent?
So a letter of intent, some grant funders will ask you before they will give you the application or open the application, you have to submit a letter of intent. And it's a pretty simple letter. There's a lot of templates available online if you've never written one. Instrumental that Angie shared might even have one available, but it just, it expresses your intent and desire to apply for the grant that they're, like a lot of funders have cycles. So they'll open up the letter of intent, say in February, and they'll say the grant's going to open up in April, and they'll have dates for when you need to go through both of those processes. Some are less formal and they don't have dates, but you just need to go through both of those processes. And I guess they just kind of want to know. And so like if you kind of even need to know what you're going to apply for and state that in the letter of intent sometimes, not always, but sometimes. So they want to know that it's not just a random, you're not just sending out a bunch of submissions, LOIs to a bunch of funders, so.
And then also to add on to that, if you look at the yellow launch at the library card, on the opposite side, there's a list of resources at the library. We do have a resource that's called Plan Builder. It's literally a fill in the blank, and it has an LOI template on there for you to use. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And sometimes funders will have their own criteria that they want included in the letter of intent. So just read for detail, read very carefully.
I can probably speak loud enough.
Sure, go ahead.
That actually was related to the first question. If you are a brand new organization and you don't have any history or anything to show, then you should obviously start local as far as funding. But what is the likelihood of, if you're starting from the ground up like that, how do you all perceive that? You don't have anything to show, it's just like the vision, that's all that you see.
That's right. I can see.
How is that received?
I can see Angie getting queued up over here, but I'm going to jump in. I'm going to make a plug for the Incubator, but also that's where research, evidence-based information about other places in the country, this exact work that I'm talking about and that we're trying to start here has been successful. Here's how we're following that model. This is our intention here locally, but being able to show that research and that evidence of its proven success in other places will be critical if you don't have any other data really to be able to share. To show that there's a proven model that you're going to be following will help build confidence.
Yeah, that's exactly right. So we do fund newer organizations, and it's typically when they've reached out to us, we've built that relationship that we talked about that's so important today, and they've been able to share replicable programs from around the world that they're going to establish here locally. And I can think of lots of different organizations that we've jointly funded and sort of we've given birth to their organizations here because it's important. You need the funding to get going, and where do you start if you can't get the funding from your local funders? So I mentioned the Community Solutions Incubator. So through our Center for Nonprofit Excellence, we have a group of new and emerging nonprofits and nonprofit leaders that they're a cohort that work together over the course of a year, sometimes two, and we take them through a monthly session that's an educational session on how to incorporate, how to look at your budgeting, financial management, fundraising, HR. We cover business plans and strategic planning, and we just kind of hold your hands as you're sort of getting ready to leave the nest and take flight, so to speak, not a pun, but so to speak. And through that incubator, we really build those relationships with those organizations and feel, as funders, much more confident providing funding throughout our normal granting cycle. So I would encourage you can find it on our website. Genevieve is the director of that center and of the incubator, and we have a great team, and that's all we do is kind of help make those connections. So, yeah.
And to add on to that, data, always really fun, especially if you know that there's a nonprofit in another community that you want to do something similar here. Demographics Now and Reference USA, two resources, again, on the other side of that form. We can actually look at the demographics, and this is like census information, even psychographic information about the people who live in that community that you're kind of wanting to, that's similar to ours, if you're wanting to duplicate kind of that. And again,
And a lot of times those nonprofits are so proud of their work and would share whatever you'd request of them, especially if you share that you want to think about something similar here. So,
Definitely.
Good questions. We have time for about 2 more, and I'll go to those who haven't yet had a chance to ask a question.
I don't need the microphone. Angie, do you offer that same thing for an existing agency?
So we have similar offerings for existing agencies. If you look at our website under our Center for Nonprofit Excellence tab, we are offering ongoing educational sessions. We're offering training for staff and boards. We're offering executive director leadership networks where we have different topics, and sometimes they are about grant writing or grant funding or our grant cycles. So absolutely, it's very similar. It's not as focused on sort of the infancy stage, but we can certainly pass along that information to more established nonprofits as well. So part of our mission is to provide monetary support to nonprofits, but also to make sure that the nonprofits that we're partnering with are strong and are sustainable. And that's really good stewardship of our donors' dollars when we ensure that through these non-monetary programs and services and resources. So we have quite a few of them available.
And a final question that I'll ask, and this is more for our funders. So what do you do if you're declined or rejected? From a funder's perspective, what are best practices you see?
If you're declined funding, the best thing you can do is ask for a follow-up meeting. Hopefully they've given you some inclination in the letter or the phone call that gives you an idea of why, but it's perfectly okay, and I encourage it to ask for a meeting, just to say, help me understand, were there technical aspects that weren't good? Was there something about the content of our application? Was it the data? And just get that better idea. Again, you're building that relationship with that funder, then they understand and get to know you as an organization a little bit better, and your passion and your seriousness to your commitment and your dedication. That's the best thing you can do. The worst thing you can do is badmouth that funder. And it happens more than you'd think, and it happens on social media. And if you ever want to get a grant from them again, think twice about that. But it does happen. I mean, we have money and we have to give it away, right? But it's hard. There's always, they're competitive, and tough decisions have to be made, and there's criteria, and there's always reasons for why, and so understanding that and accepting that, and then seeking help to figure out how to make a stronger application going forward.
We also offer some sessions for nonprofits thinking about applying for our grants to log on and have conversations with our grants and scholarships manager to ask questions before you hit submit. And I feel like that really helps both sides, right? So we know what the expectations are as nonprofits and also as grant funders. And so I would encourage you, a lot of organizations that are grant funding organizations offer similar Zoom sessions or office hours or whatever it may be, to take advantage of those and have those conversations. You know, I feel like as grant funders, when we've had those conversations with you and we know that you're checking all of the requirements and guidelines, we want to fund organizations. It's so much easier for us to do so.
Great, thank you so much. I just want to say again, thank you to our panelists for being here, for your expertise and sharing these tips with us today. We're about ready to move into our breakout session time. Well, actually first, join me in appreciating our panelists, would you? Before we split up into the breakout session, I just wanted to highlight for you a couple of grant opportunities at the Community Foundation of East Central Illinois. One is open now. It is our annual Community Commitment Grant Cycle. These are for durable, non-disposable items, and the typical range is from $500 up to $7,500. Eligibility is for 501c3 organizations that are serving residents of East Central Illinois. So you'll check out our website to make sure that you're in our service area. The deadline for these is August the 31st. And if you see that hyperlink, which will be in the handout for you, found on cfeci.org, that's where you can access the guidelines that Stephanie referenced, as well as the application. And then I'm very excited, you're our first group that we're announcing our nonprofit capacity building grants. These are brand new. They are up to $5,000, requiring a 10% match. And these are for organizations that are 501c3 but are a little established, so at least 2 years of operation. This is for capacity building and technical assistance needs. So this can be for strategic planning, this can be help with board development, this can be leadership development. You can already see on September the 1st, our guidelines will be posted on the website, and that application will open then as well. Apply by September the 30th for those, and we'll be holding a Zoom information session if you'd like to get more information about that. It will be on September the 6th, that's a Tuesday, and you can register, just ask me for information about that. So we're very excited about that, but we have about 15-ish minutes before we'll break, before we close for the day. So I'm going to encourage our panelists to probably get up, and everyone can kind of get up, and we'll spread out. Perhaps Bev and Stephanie maybe over on this side, Angie and Madeline on that side. Ask your questions, network, and we hope you get some good information. Again, thank you for being here today, and join us at our next session, which is Board Boot Camp, Secrets for Successful Fundraising. So get your board involved in the fundraising on September the 27th. Thank you.